Great Ideas is a program devoted to uncovering the meaning of the ideas we all use every day of our lives. In the period to follow, Dr. Mortimer J. Adler will undertake to discuss some aspect of a basic idea. Dr. Adler.
Welcome to another discussion of the great ideas. Today, we shall deal with language as a great idea. The special significance of language, special importance of language as an idea, lies in the fact that it has relation to all the other great ideas in a particular way, insofar as ideas and thoughts are expressed by men in words, in speech, in language. As a matter of fact, what men have thought about language and the uses or limitations of language have affected what they have thought about many other things. Now, I'm sure that all of you are acquainted with the word semantics. In recent times, the science of semantics and the art of semantics has a great deal of currency and popularity. You hear people say, when a conversation is going on and someone starts to make a comment on the use of words or the difficulty of finding the right word, oh, now you're involved in semantics, or that's just a semantic problem. And many people, I think, suppose, because of the recent vogue of semantics, that the interest and concern with language is a very modern or even contemporary thing. It is true that there is a great contemporary interest in language, but man's concern with language as a vehicle for the expression of thought, for the communication of ideas and emotions, is perennial. It has existed in every age, in every century. It is as prominent in antiquity as in modern times. If you read the dialogues of Plato, for example, you will find the Socrates and the people he is talking to continually calling attention to the slipperiness of words and how words sometimes conceal thought as well as express it. Or to take another example in the ancient world, the treatises or works of Aristotle, you will find that Aristotle is continually commenting on the 3, the 4, the 5 senses of a word like justice, or a word like government, or a word like substance or liberty. In fact, one of the books of Aristotle's metaphysics is nothing but a commentary on 25 or 26 basic words, an attempt to clarify their meanings and to distinguish their senses. So important did Aristotle think the clarification of language as an instrument of thought was. The same thing is true in the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages developed an elaborate grammar, an elaborate theory of signs and how words had to be used to convey different shades of meaning and to clarify our intentions in speech. And again, in modern times, such philosophers as Hobbes and Locke developed chapters in their works on the use and abuse of words, how language should be used to be effective, and what pitfalls and errors should be avoided. But there's this one difference. There's one important difference between the ancient and the modern attitude toward language. The ancients regarded the fault as ours when we misuse language. It's almost like saying that we had certain weaknesses, men have certain weaknesses, moral weaknesses, and the moral virtues are necessary to overcome the weaknesses of our desires or appetites or passions. The fault is ours when we misuse language. And if we succeed, the reward is ours when we master language and make it serve our purposes. But the modern attitude is quite different. The modern attitude almost looks at language as if it were a foreign thing, as if it were an enemy of ours. Such speech as the tyranny of words, that language is a source of deception, that language can in some way be a barrier to communication, puts upon language, as if it were not our own, the burden of the difficulty. And so moderns regard, as the ancients never did, have in mind the ideal of a perfect language, the construction of a language which, unlike the language we ordinarily use, would have all the difficulties removed and be a perfectly lucid, clear medium of communication. Now, there's one point that was generally agreed upon until very recently, namely that speech or language is a particularly human thing. Speech, in some ways, is one of the distinguishing characteristics of man. In the last 50 years, there has been some disagreement with this point. Biologists have supposed that they have discovered communication among bees, among insects. The students of the higher apes have claimed that they have found in the chimpanzees a language, a vocabulary of 120 or 125 words. And so it is now thought that communication or language is not a special property belonging to man, but one that is shared with other animals. I think this is wrong, by the way, and I should like to tell you why. I still think it is true that language or speech is a peculiarly human characteristic, a property of man and man alone. And my reason for thinking so is that communication is one thing, and language or speech is another. When one animal communicates to another animal, it does so by an emotional cry, an expression of emotions, the way a man might express his emotions of rage or fear or anger or hate. So the animals express their emotions. But this communication, from one animal to another, is not speech. Speech doesn't begin until thought is communicated. And thought is communicated by words which function as parts of speech in sentences. Sentences that have syntax, in which the parts of speech go together in a certain way to form the structure of a sentence. Now, I say to you that the first time any animal utters a sentence that can be parsed, a sentence that has syntactical structure in which the words function as parts of speech, then I'm willing to admit that other animals than man have language of speech. Until then, I think we must only say other animals may have means of communication, but they do not employ language or speech. Now, this last fact leads us to the problem which I should like to discuss with you first. Problem of the nature or the naturalness of human language. Let's consider that at once. I just said a moment ago that language was a distinctive trait of human nature, that it was natural for man to be a user of words in the form of speech to communicate ideas and emotions. But though this is the case, though language is natural to man in this sense, as it is not natural to any other animal, it is also true that among human beings there is no natural language. There is no single natural language. Let me explain this point. If one takes the cries of other animals, the instinctive expressions of emotion, in the case of the chimpanzees, or the movements and sounds made by insects and the brushing of their wings by which biologists tell us they communicate to one another, we find that those means of communication are quite natural to each species of insect or animal. That is, all the animals of a certain species will have the same, exactly the same means of communication. But although language is natural to men, we find in the human race a tremendous plurality and variety of languages. The tribes of men, the races of men, the different nationalities all speak different tongues. In this sense, there is no natural human language. All our languages are as the saying goes, conventional modes of speech, languages which men themselves have made up, as they have built different kinds of houses and have clothed themselves differently and have used at different times in different places different implements in the process of conquering nature or controlling the environment around them. Now, at the same time that there is a vast plurality of conventional languages among the races and nationalities of men, there is another fact of the greatest significance that has an opposite tendency. In general, it can be supposed that whatever can be said by men in one conventional language, such as French, or English, or Russian, or Hottentot, or Zulu, or any of the Eskimo languages, can be translated into any other conventional language used by men. The anthropologists who travel among the various tribes and races of men somehow can learn to communicate their thoughts in the language, translate from English or French or German, one of the European languages, into one of the primitive languages. And any of the civilized languages is capable of being translated into another. Now, this fact that each of the conventional languages, languages like French and German and English and Russian and Italian, can be translated into other languages, would seem to show that there must be something common to all these languages. And whatever this is, which we shall try to discover in a moment, whatever this is that is common to all these many diverse conventional languages, suggests that it may be possible someday to construct a single, universal, common language in which all men could communicate to one another. Now, suppose you were to ask me what a natural human language might be like. I've been saying that there is no natural human language, that at present we have not yet been able to construct in the history of mankind a single, universal, common language. That we are separated, one race of men, one nationality of men from another, by the diverse tongues we speak, even though we are able to translate our thoughts from one language into another. But suppose you were to ask me, what would a natural language be like? What does one mean by supposing a natural human language? Now, the only way I can answer this question imaginatively is to remind you of a passage in the Bible that I think most of you know, though perhaps you do not remember as well as you should. It is a really quite extraordinary passage. It is the story of the Tower of Babel. And you all know that the meaning of the word Babel is the confusion of tongues. But let me read you the exact passage, and let's look at exactly what happened at that point in the story. The people, the human race, at that time, men said to one another, "Come, let us make a city and a tower, the top whereof may reach to heaven. And let us make our name famous, before we be scattered abroad in all lands." And the Lord God, came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of Adam were building. And he said, that is, God said, "Behold, it is one people, and all have one tongue. And they have begun to do this, neither will they leave off from their designs till they accomplish them indeed. Come ye therefore, let us go down, and there confound their speech, that they may not understand one another's speech. And so the Lord scattered them from that place into all lands, and they ceased to build the city. And therefore the name thereof was called Babel, because there the language of the whole earth was confounded. And from thence the Lord scattered them abroad upon the face of all countries." Now, as I understand this story, what we are being told here in the Bible is that before God confused or confounded the speech of men, at this moment in history, all men, all human beings talked one language, as if it were a natural language. And only after this point, when God confounded their speech, were men separated from one another by diverse languages, which prevented them from understanding one another until they were able to translate from one language to another. Now, you may still ask what I would mean by one common natural language, the kind of language that men had before God confounded human speech at the Tower of Babel. And I turn to another passage in Genesis, a passage at the very beginning, the opening of the story, where the story of the Garden of Eden, when Adam was still there, and there's a passage in that story which reads as follows. And the Lord God, having formed out of the ground all the beasts of the earth and all the fowls of the air, brought them to Adam to see what he would call them. For whatsoever Adam called any living creature, the same is its name. Now notice that passage. For what we are being told here is that as the angel brought a different animal before Adam, a flower or an animal, Adam gave it its name, and that was its name. That was its right name, the name that belonged to it, as if that name was the natural and proper name of that thing. Now, we in English, we say dog. In German, we say Hund. In French, we say chien. None of those is the right name of the animal because there are three of them. Any one of them is as good as any other. But the name that Adam gave, according to the story, was the natural name for the animal. So a natural language would have only one name for each thing, and that would be the right name, the proper or natural name. Now, we know, so far as any actual history of mankind is concerned, that apart from the Bible, that there never has been such a natural language. But this idea of a natural language raises for us a problem about the conventional languages which we speak, the various languages such as French and German and English. The problem is, how in these conventional languages do such sounds as dog or hunt or chien get their meaning? They're just sounds, or the marks on paper which we write are just physical marks. How do these, what at first are merely meaningless sounds or meaningless marks, get their meaning? That's one of the problems that we must face when we consider a purely conventional language in which we make up the sounds and marks that constitute the language. And the second problem is the problem about the ambiguity of the words that we use. The fact that these words we make up soon get to have a large number of meanings. And the fact that they have a variety of different meanings often tends to confuse us and make our use of language difficult and sometimes even treacherous. I would like to deal with this problem now. That is, the problem of how words get their meaning first, and deal later with the problem of ambiguity. How do words get their meaning? Where do they get their meaning from? Let me correct that last statement just a little. One shouldn't speak of words as getting or changing meaning so much as the sounds or marks which become words when they get meaning and function differently as words when they change their meaning. A sound or mark, the mark one makes on a page, the sound one makes with one's voice, when it is meaningless, is not a word. A meaningful sound or mark is a word. And the problem I want to face is, how, in the origin of language, do these meaningless marks and sounds become words by becoming meaningful? How do sounds and marks become meaningful? Now, one problem about the origin of language is, I think, in general insoluble, and that is the history of the invention of the different sounds and marks that constitute our conventional languages like French or German or English. But the problem of how those sounds and marks, when they are invented, become meaningful is, I think, a soluble problem. Let me read you 2 or 3 texts from the great books on the question of how sounds or marks become meaningful and thus function as words. The first text, and in some ways one of the most striking texts, is from Aristotle. Spoken words, writes Aristotle, are the symbols of mental experience, our ideas or images or feelings, and written words are the symbols of spoken words. And Aristotle goes on to say, just as all men do not have the same writing. They don't all write in French or in English or in German or Spanish. So all men do not have the same speech sounds. But the mental experiences, that is, our ideas or images or feelings, which these, our sounds or words, directly symbolize, are the same for all men, as also are those things of which our experiences are the images. What Aristotle was trying to say here is that our images or ideas directly symbolize the things of which they are the ideas, and it is through these that our sounds and marks, our words, signify or point to, mean things. John Locke carries this same analysis forward by saying that words came to be used by men as the signs of their ideas, not by any natural connection that there is between particular articulate sounds and certain ideas, for then there would be one language amongst all men, but by a voluntary imposition whereby such a word is made arbitrarily the mark of such an idea. And Aquinas summarizes what Locke and Aristotle earlier trying to say here when he says that words are the signs of ideas, and ideas, because of their similitude, because they are the images of things, are the signs of things, and therefore it is evident that words function in the signification of things through the ideas or images in the mind. In other words, it is through the content of the mind, our ideas and images, that words come to mean the things of the world. One other passage, Aquinas says, we can give a name to anything only insofar as we can understand it. Let me do a diagram for you to show you this. Things, words, and by words I mean marks or sounds that we make. Now, how do words signify, point to, mean things? How does the word dog mean the animal? According to this theory, only through the idea or image of dog that we have in our minds. That is, the word we use, the sound we use, signifies the idea of dog, and the idea of dog, because it is the idea of dog, signifies dog. The word does not mean the thing directly. The word cannot get meaning from the thing or cannot point to the thing except it goes through this circuit. The word we use, the sound or mark we invent, must be attached to an idea we have, and the idea, because it is the natural image of the thing of which it is the idea, signifies the idea, and the word gets its meaning through that. Now, that is terribly important to understand, because when you understand that, you see a distinction between, if I may use this way of saying it, a physical word and a mental word. The sound dog, or the word itself, or the word mark is a physical word. It's a physical mark on paper or a physical sound I utter. But my idea is a mental word. And the difference between a mental word and a physical word is that a mental word is a meaning, whereas a physical word, a sound or mark, gets its meaning from its attachment to or connection with a mental word. In other words, if there were no mental words, if we didn't have ideas, there would be no meanings and we'd have no language either. The basis for the translatability of one conventional language into another is the fact that all these conventional languages express the same set of ideas and images that men have concerning the world in which they live. It is this fact that makes it possible to translate from one conventional language into another. But let me repeat, the most important thing here is the fact that mind is the realm of meaning. That all the meanings that we have come from the fact that we have ideas and images in our mind, and it is these meanings that are attached to words and give them their significance. In the time that is left, I would like to deal briefly with one other problem in connection with language, and that is the problem of ambiguity, which arises from the fact that we often have many meanings for one and the same word, and also from the fact that we often have many words to express one and the same idea. These two facts, that we have too many words sometimes for a single idea, or on the other hand, too many meanings for a single word, really creates the problem of communication. Think about what communication means. Communication has at the root of it unity, community. It involves two minds sharing the same idea. It isn't enough that they use the same word, because if two people use the same word, one having one meaning for it, another quite different meaning, they aren't communicating. They are communicating only if, when one uses the word and the other uses the same word, they use it to express the same idea, the same emotion, the same thought, or the same intention. Only in that way do you have two minds getting together, coming to terms, sharing experiences of a mental or emotional sort. Now, one of the problems that men have always faced is how to overcome this difficulty about our conventional languages. Sometimes they think that the problem would be solved if we could invent an ideal language in which each word had only one meaning. But I don't think this would solve the problem, because then we would have to find other words to express the relation, the connection of the various meanings. For example, when we use the word freedom, we often use it in a number of different senses, but those senses are connected. And the connection of those senses is part of the significance of the word freedom. If we were to have a different word for each meaning of the word freedom, we wouldn't be able to express our sense of the connection of those different meanings. I think the only solution of the ambiguity of words as a barrier to communication or a difficulty with human speech, the only solution is not one of inventing an ideal or perfect language, but using the language we have, using the words we have to clarify the meanings of our words. We have to use speech in order to make speech itself more perfect or more usable or more effective. It's a hard job, one we must be continually at, but only by working at it can we bring our minds together through the medium of language. This must conclude our discussion of language, or at least of some of the most important problems it raises, especially the problem of how words get meanings. Next time, we shall consider another great idea and some of the fundamental issues it raises as we have considered these problems in connection with language today. I hope you will be with us again. Thank you very much.